Hi, thanks for coming by to take a look at our presentation. My name is James Schlotzauer, and I'm working with Marie Rowland and Kennedy Shelton in William and Mary School of Education, specifically for Education 624, Theory and Practice of Multicultural Counseling. This is our term project, and we are going to be exploring digital environments as the sites of cultural identity and development. We're going to be looking at both gender and age, and how these things are affected by social media, both positively and negatively, and then taking a look at the counseling ramifications. So this presentation is going to examine how media functions as both a cultural and developmental environment, shaping identity across lifespan and gender, and to a lesser degree, race. We focus on three groups that whose identity processes are going to look different in digital spaces. We've got adolescent girls navigating appearance and beauty norms, and that's going to be explored with Kennedy. Then from there, we're going to look at boys and young men who encounter online masculinity and red pill ideologies, and that's with me. And then Marie's going to bring us older adults integrating digital platforms into long-standing pre-internet worldviews. Now, looking across these groups to can help us understand how these digital environments can support identity development within cultural parameters for some individuals while complicating it or disrupting it for others. The issue statement basically now is that social media acts as a cultural ecosystem for and influences self-concept, belonging, worldview formation, and mental health. These digital contexts can intensify existing inequities relating to gender, age, race, ability, and other identities. And we're going to try to explore these in greater detail as we go forward. So as we move through this presentation, there's a certain commonality of desired outcomes of intervention that we're looking to address in the three demographics that we've identified, but as well as any demographic that may walk through our doors. We're looking to improve clients' digital literacy and their ability to evaluate online content critically. That's huge. Most people can't do that. We're looking to support healthy, culturally informed identity development within digital environments. We're looking to reduce harm linked to algorithmic bias, gender norms, misinformation, online radicalization. And then, most importantly, we're hoping to help inform our classmates and ourselves as we've gone through the research to integrate digital culture awareness into our work. This is crucial. These are crucial things to consider with any client who comes into our offices, no matter who they are or where they come from, because even if they don't use social media themselves, they are still going to be deeply affected by the pervasive use of social media through society. With that said, I'm going to pass this off now to Kennedy, who's going to talk about the algorithmic influences on adolescent girls.
First, we will be discussing how algorithmic systems actively reinforce narrow beauty standards for adolescent girls. Social media has become far more than a space for entertainment or connection. It now functions as a powerful developmental environment. For adolescent girls, these platforms actively shape how they view their bodies, their worth, and their identities. Algorithms prioritize content that generates engagement, and appearance focused images that are often edited and filtered tend to perform well. As a result, girls are repeatedly exposed to narrow and unrealistic beauty standards. This is especially significant during adolescence, a period marked by identity exploration, heightened self consciousness, and increased sensitivity to peer feedback. Girls are learning who they are while constantly comparing themselves to curated images of others. Likes, comments, and shares become a form of social currency, discreetly reinforcing the idea that attention and approval are earned through appearance. Over time, this environment normalizes unrealistic beauty standards and contributes to increased body dissatisfaction, anxiety, and self objectification. These outcomes are not individual weaknesses, but predictable responses to systems designed to reward visual conformity and constant comparison. Because these pressures are so deeply embedded in digital systems, it's important to look at how we currently try to address them and where those efforts fall short. Existing efforts to address these concerns focus on building confidence or self esteem. While confidence building can be helpful, it often overlooks the larger systems shaping girls' experiences. When girls are told to be confident, responsibility is placed on them without acknowledging the algorithmic environments influencing what they see and internalize. Media and digital literacy education is inconsistently implemented and often focuses on identifying fake images rather than understanding how algorithms shape content exposure. Additionally, platforms provide little transparency about how content is promoted, and there is minimal structural or policy level reform aimed at protecting adolescents. Given these limitations, supporting adolescent girls requires more intentional and developmentally informed approaches. Supporting healthier identity development means moving beyond surface level solutions. Teaching algorithm awareness helps girls recognize that their feeds are curated and reinforced, not reflections of reality or personal worth. Counseling interventions should also address body focused distress and self objectification directly, helping girls understand how appearance based validation impacts their emotions and self concept. Strengthening emotional regulation skills allows adolescents to better manage the stress and anxiety tied to online comparison. Most importantly, identity work should help girls ground their sense of self in values, relationships, purpose, and competence rather than appearance alone. These protective factors support resilience in digital spaces. However, even well designed interventions don't exist in a vacuum, and efforts towards change often encounter resistance. Resistance appears at multiple levels. Families may underestimate the psychological impact of social media, viewing it as a normal or harmless part of adolescence. Schools may recognize the problem but lack the training, time, and resources to address it effectively. At a broader level, social media companies are incentivized to maintain engagement driven systems because attention fuels profit. This makes meaningful change difficult without external regulation or advocacy. Because of these barriers, progress cannot rely on counseling alone. It also requires advocacy and collective action. Meaningful progress depends on action beyond individual counseling. Advocacy efforts can include regulating youth directed algorithms and pushing for greater transparency from platforms. Parent education initiatives help caregivers better understand the pressures their children face online. Youth led advocacy is also powerful as it allows girls to challenge beauty norms within their own peer cultures. School based digital wellness programs offer accessible opportunities for prevention and education. While advocacy addresses systems, counselors still play a critical role in supporting girls across everyday contexts. Counselors can support adolescent girls across family, clinical, and school settings. Within families, counselors can increase awareness of algorithmic pressure and help caregivers shift praise away from appearance toward values, effort, and character. In clinical settings, assessing social media use as part of intake allows counselors to understand contributors to distress better. Addressing body dissatisfaction and self objectification directly supports identity development beyond appearance based validation. In schools, counselors can integrate digital literacy into programming, offer group interventions focused on body image and social media stress, and support students experience appearance related distress. School based counseling is especially important for early intervention and prevention. It's also essential to recognize that these experiences do not affect all girls in the same way. Beauty standards promoted through social media are not culturally neutral. Eurocentric norms dominate many platforms, placing girls from marginalized backgrounds at greater risk for harm. These pressures intersect with race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and ability. Culture shapes how body image and identity are experienced, meaning counseling must be culturally responsive. Advocacy should address how algorithms disproportionately promote narrow beauty standards that marginalize adolescent girls whose bodies, features, and identities fall outside dominant norms. When we look at adolescent girls navigating beauty standards online, we see how algorithms reinforce gendered norms during critical periods of identity development. Importantly, these dynamics do not operate in isolation. The same digital systems also shape how boys and young men construct their masculinity, often through exposure to red pill and dominance focused content, which the next section will explore.
Thanks, Kennedy. And much like the depth and breadth of algorithmic influences and online influences on girls and young women, boys and young men are also faced with the same sorts of impacts with online interactions. But they are experienced differently, and in this particular subgroup, I am going to be focusing on boys and young men as they navigate online masculinity and red pill content. This is not necessarily specific to all young men or to all boys, but there is a growing population of young men and boys who are drawn to these philosophies. So, young men navigating things like online masculinity, red pill ideology. And when I'm talking about online masculinity, I'm talking more towards the hyper masculinity, alpha male philosophies that are promulgated by social media influencers like Andrew Tate. He's not the only one, but he is prominent in this. Platforms like YouTube, TikTok, Reddit expose young people, often in their formative and adolescent years, to a steady stream of influencers like Tate who peddle rigid gender expectations, misogyny, grievance narratives, and then again, red pill ideology. That term is borrowed from the movie The Matrix, and it frames feminism and gender equality as illusions oppressing men, urging followers to wake up, so to speak, to a harsh reality where women are manipulative and male dominance is the only path to success and the only way to be a real man. These digital spaces, they promise to belonging for boys who are feeling isolated or insecure, but they often distort self-identity, they strain relationships, and they stunt emotional growth. Algorithms will amplify this by pushing extreme misogynistic content to teens who may only be innocently looking for things like fitness tips, bodybuilding advice, gaming advice, things along those natures, but they'll normalize toxic tropes that bleed into real life behaviors like increased aggression or withdrawal from emotional intimacy. Research shows that 73% of adolescent boys regularly encounter such masculinity related posts from, again, building muscle to the alpha male dating strategies, and they foster a sense of shame around vulnerability. In essence, what starts as a search for self-improvement often spirals into a worldview that equates manhood with control, and it does leave many young men feeling more alienated than empowered. What are you doing about it? Well, current efforts include things like school-based programs on consent and anti-bullying and those sorts of things that aim to foster safer interactions, but these things fall short because they don't tackle the deeper roots of what this stuff is. This stuff can lead to online radicalization, and it can also, or the internalized shame from gender norms, but it goes beyond radicalization. It goes to a whole concept of masculinity, what makes a man, what brings these young men into hypermasculine spaces to their own detriment and to the detriment of people around them. These initiatives focus on overt behaviors like harassment, bullying, etc., but they miss that subtle pull of echo chambers where boys bond over a shared truth, right? And I do put truth in quotes. Now, contact moderations can be on platforms. It can be another way to address these things, but that's also notoriously inconsistent. Harmful videos can get flagged, can be taken down, but then they resurface on alt accounts or they migrate to less regulated sites like Telegram or Truth Social. And then a 2025 study found that 80% of 16 to 17-year-old boys in the UK had viewed Andrew Tate style content despite these measures. And it does highlight how algorithms do reward engagement over a provocation, rage bait, that sort of thing, over safety and personal development. The result? These approaches, like I said, they treat symptoms, but not the whole ecosystem that fuels the fire. So what steps can we take towards desired outcomes? Well, this presentation actually is way more simplistic because of time constraints than it should be. This is extremely difficult and very, very nuanced when dealing with young men and the issues that bring them towards this sort of red pill ideology. We have to try to look to developing healthier identity development and reduce harm, looking at targeted reflective strategies, right? Blah, blah, blah. That sort of stuff sounds great, but when it comes right down to these actual programs that are going to work with this, it's a much more nuanced and difficult thing to bring to young men and have them accept it. We have to develop programs that encourage reflection on masculinity norms and emotional expression, like workshops dissecting influencer scripts, alongside discussions on emotional expression, drawing from evidence-based models like those, like those in the Movember Foundation, right, which is something that's very big in both firefighter and police culture and does promote positive masculinity initiatives within hypermasculine spaces. But you need to have kids then who are actually in these sorts of spaces that they can do that. What you're also trying to do also in number 2 here is help them map how they encounter harmful content and how through the For You pages, etc., and understanding how algorithmic feeds work. And then kind of focus them more on podcasts on equitable relationships, communities celebrating vulnerability. Even as I say that, I think to myself, yeah, no way are some of these guys going to go for this. Yeah, the biggest and most important thing, however, and I'm not dismissing it entirely, but the most important thing is the third thing: linking youth to positive anchors. You pair them with mentoring programs featuring men who model empathy and collaboration, and you counter the lone wolf alpha myth, right? That's huge, and that is by far, in my experience, the best way to work with young men to help navigate these issues. Pilot studies show that these sorts of connections help boost self-esteem and reduce grievance thinking by 40% in just 6 months. And this is a way through male interaction, male-to-male peer and mentorship, that really can help young men get beyond red pill ideology. And that then segues directly into expected resistance, right? Some young men are going to bristle at even the discussion of masculinity, viewing it as emasculating on their own budding identities, especially if they've already internalized this red pill narrative. And they do that as protective against rejection and against what they perceive as attack on their identities and their cultures as young men. They're going to go into it with a why fix what's not broken, and then they're going to mistake critique for cancellation and erasure, and that is going to be resistance to be expected. Even tougher than that is the pull of online peer groups where loyalty to influencers like Tate become a badge of honor. These echo chambers reinforce echo chambers, labeling dissenters as blue-pilled traitors, and they can isolate boys further and escalate defensiveness during interventions. This is to be expected and to a certain degree even respected. So expected and even respected as you then engage with patience and non-judgmental rapport building, which are key to navigating this minefield to redirect that energy in those belief systems. On the advocacy front, we really have to amplify systemic shifts. So first, we want to champion healthy masculinity curricula in school and youth organizations, right? And it should be subtle. It shouldn't be crammed down these kids' throat. It should be subtle, and it should be a consistent modeling by men in their environments and in their ecosystems, right? You want to lobby for media literacy modules in schools that help to teach boys about algorithmic biases. And then that's actually been piloted in the UK, and it's reduced misogynistic views by as much as 25%. Secondarily, then, you want to back platform reforms. This one, yeah, we really want to do this, although it is Herculean and kind of a David and Goliath sort of effort. But you want to join coalitions that push for age-gated content and transparent algorithms, partnering with groups like the Center for Counseling Digital Hates to hold online tech giants accountable. And then thirdly, aligning with gender violence prevention networks, funding integrated campaigns that tie online radicalization to real-world harms, ensuring that boys hear stories of thriving beyond masculinity. And what I mean by that is, let's get what we need to do is have boys embrace positive masculinity within themselves while acknowledging how hypermasculinity and red pill ideology actually hurts not only them but the people around them. So these are systemic and activism sort of strategies that we might want to consider. Now, as to counselors and counseling implications, as I mentioned and sort of alluded to in prior slides, this absolutely requires a nuanced, tailored integration approach or an integrated approach. In schools, you want to teach teachers and staff to start noticing red flags like sudden jargon, right? Things like simp or red pilled or soy boy or beta boy being used by young men as they started to interact with one another and to describe one another, to engage with one another. And that can help to enable early proactive check-ins without stigma, right? And then from there, with family or familial counseling, you can equip parents to bridge the digital divide by offering workshops on decoding these subcultures and then fostering open dialogues with dads who model emotional sharing if the son respects his father. One of the things that's sometimes lost in these sort of familiar interventions are that a lot of these boys don't really respect or like their fathers, and it's not going to be effective unless they have at least a decent, respectful relationship with their father. If they do, then you can ask the dad to start to help to model emotional sharing to sort of dismiss that tough guy facade. And then finally, clinically, we can lean on narrative therapy infused with multicultural lenses. We're going to get to that in just a second in the next slide. But if you want to help clients rewrite their stories and reframe what is framed in hypermasculinity as weakness, you reframe it as strength through exercises in narrative therapy and in redefining strength and what makes a person, what reflects weaknesses and strength. Much of red pill ideology, when you do break it down to its granular level, reflects weakness. And if you can show that and have young men accept that, you're way ahead of the game. And then finally, studies do show that linking these sorts of things together in a clinical context does in fact lower distress. This then brings us to the intersections of with multicultural considerations. Nothing occurs in a vacuum. Nothing stands alone without being influenced by or intersecting with our personal cultures and identities. And so for white men and boys, red pill ideology can often resonate very strongly because it's laced with a fear of marginalization themselves, and can also and it can also challenge any sense of entitlement with anti-feminist grievances as well. And it frames equality as a zero-sum loss. This can entrench white privilege. It can entrench a certain animosity towards other cultures and other individuals, and against women in general, while breeding resentment. And it can be quite radicalizing. Now, for boys and men of color, the stakes layer on. Racial stereotypes like hyper-aggressive black masculinity or emasculated Asian tropes can intersect with online narratives, and it can amplify pressures to overperform toughness or reject vulnerability. And these sorts of things need to be acknowledged, and then interventions need to be tailored to honor these nuances and to understand them, and as I said earlier, expect them, respect them, and then reframe and refocus them. And then you're going to be in order to do that, you need to draw on culturally responsive role models to foster identities that can resist both racism and misogyny. And with that said, I hope that this was a way to at least touch on the surface of these issues. They are, in my mind, they are deeply important as we move forward in our society, and they are complex and nuanced, and we were just able to skim the top. With that said, though, I'm about to pass this off to Marie, who will talk about older adults and their issues with the integration of social media in their own self-concept.
So I'm going to talk about older adults and how our identities have evolved since social media. So there are a lot of unflattering stereotypes of older adults on social media. There's the OK Boomer movement. There's the Gen X Karens. We're often seen as out of touch, unwilling to change. It's also annoyingly assumed that we only use Facebook. In reality, there's a lot of older adults who are using social media to challenge these stereotypes. For instance, grandfluencers are challenging ageism by portraying themselves as stylish and sexy. But I'm going to focus on Gen X influencers, in part because we represent a bigger footprint on social media. We use it just as much as Gen Z, surprisingly. But also because we had a very distinct pre- and post-social media life. We had an offline childhood. We saw the introduction of the internet and then MySpace and then Facebook. And now we're in middle-aged, living through the era of the algorithm. Before we had Gen X influencers, our identity was kind of sad. We were called the latchkey generation because we had to let ourselves into an empty house. We were also called the forgotten generation. We were neglected by our parents. We were left to fend for ourselves. We're often portrayed as outcasts and loners. So Gen X influencers became popular because they tapped into our love of nostalgia. And now, instead of the sad loner stereotype, we've been rebranded as cool, a little badass. Instead of being seen as neglected, we're portrayed as survivors with grit. We're considered a little feral, a little scary. When the apocalypse comes, we're the house you want to find because we can MacGyver our way through anything with some gum and a rubber band. The parents among us have new stereotypes, the cool mom, the rock and roll dad. But importantly, social media helped us find our people. We're no longer alone because we've bonded over this collective identity. But there's an issue. So although we feel seen now and we're empowered, this algorithmic and reinforcement of survival, grit, independence, it has a downside. This image comes from a real article on LinkedIn titled Gen X Women Would Rather Burn Out Than Ask for Help. And as a Gen X woman, I can tell you this is absolutely true. So counselors with Gen X clients should understand that grit can be a trap. There are, yes, a lot of studies showing an association between grit and life success, but there are also studies that recognize that people with a lot of grit tend to persevere in really unhealthy situations, such as toxic jobs, toxic relationships. Grit can also lead to overfunctioning, which can result in burnout and eventually a midlife crisis. Counselors should also know that the social media identity of being tough and a little badass is not a balanced view of Gen X. Many of us experienced very real attachment issues and trauma. So this study, for instance, shows that Gen X experienced much higher numbers of adverse childhood events than their boomer parents. So where do we need to go and how do we get there? So first of all, it's important to honor Gen X's independence and resourcefulness, and strengths-based approaches are really good for this. Cognitive therapies can also help Gen X reframe some unhealthy thought patterns. So for instance, instead of I have to do it all myself, we could reframe that to yes, I could do it all, but I could also choose to share responsibility. But because Gen X is at this intersection of childhood nostalgia and midlife burnout, there's a real opportunity for counselors to help Gen X define more meaning and authenticity in their life. Existential approaches are really good for this. Remember, we didn't have phones to overcome boredom. We filled our boredom with dreams of our future selves. With Gen X, you have to expect resistance. We were raised to suppress our emotions, so we might resist being vulnerable. We're also so self-sufficient that we can't fathom the idea of not being the overfunctioning adult in the room. And then if a counselor somehow minimizes our Gen X identity, we might feel invisible again and shut down. So a couple of other important considerations. Gen X is also a sandwich generation. So we're not only parenting our children, we're also often parenting our parents, and that alone can send us to therapy. It's not lost on me the irony of Gen X scrolling on their phones to relive a childhood that didn't have phones. So counselors can really help Gen X find their community by putting down the phone. Go outside, ride your bikes with real people. Don't come home until the streetlights come on. This is language we understand. In terms of advocacy, counselors could advocate for more balance by getting on social media or helping their Gen X clients get on social media to challenge the narrative of being relentlessly tough or independent. We can also get on social media to model cognitive reframing or how to share responsibility or even self-care. And finally, multicultural considerations. Just because we share a generational identity doesn't mean we don't have individual differences. There may be differences, for instance, between genders, and we all have intersectional identities. A Black Gen X man, for instance, walks through life very differently than a white Gen X woman. Let me show you an Instagram reel that demonstrates how we bond despite our diversity. This is a Black Gen X man responding to a white Gen X woman, she's an influencer, who is responding to a white Gen Z male. And after this, we'll wrap it up.
When y'all were saying that y'all used to drink from the hose, was sex not an option? You guys are movies old? We were all in the house. I don't know why that's so hard for people to understand. Our childhood was like one never-ending episode of that TV show Survivor.
So on behalf of Kennedy, Marie, and myself, thanks so much for taking the time to review our presentation. We presented three distinct demographics across different age, gender, and racial categories, all significantly affected by social media and the revolutionary effects that social media has on our society. Across all three groups, social media functions as a very powerful cultural environment that influences identity formation, worldview, emotional development, and social belonging, and it's going to continue to do so as it expands, particularly into AI. Supporting healthy development in these contexts requires a combination of digital literacy, culturally informed counseling, advocacy, and collaboration with families, schools, and communities. Kennedy, Marie, and myself are looking forward to our continued work here at William & Mary, building these skills or skills like these to support a wide range of individuals in our future work as counselors. Thanks again for your time and for reviewing this. The following 7 slides include references and our incorporated materials.